First, to tell you a little bit about myself, if you are in the Indianapolis media market 8 years ago, you might recognize me from being the county clerk, or as the newspaper always described me, the embattled Marion County clerk. That was always such a fun time. So, and before that, I was a deputy state auditor and legal counsel. I saw Dan Baston back there again. I worked with him back in the day. And so the Attorney General approached me last year with the idea that I would be helpful to figure out what we could do in Indiana to prevent public corruption. I like to joke, though, that the real reason that he asked me to do it wasn't because I had experience both as a county elected official and at the state auditor's office, but that I'm from Louisiana and I know what public corruption looks like. So. You all know quite a bit of this basic fact. I'm just going to throw this out to you to remind you how this works. As you well know, in Indiana, because of our Jacksonian background, our power to do things are dispersed between lots of different folks. So in Indiana, the state attorney general does not have the authority to prosecute criminally any of these public corruption cases. What he does do is goes after the funds after criminal prosecution by a county prosecutor or the federal government has happened and it's called civil prosecution. So when the State Board of Accounts comes in and does an audit and there's something amiss, they will certify the audit report to the Attorney General, who has a team of lawyers who go into the county courts and sue to return that money. To give you an idea about how many cases we've had lately, since 2009, there have been 232 certified audits to the Attorney General in the state of Indiana, totaling about $6.6 million. Those are just the ones that they were caught. I mean, it does seem, I don't know about you guys, but it seems like every week there is some newspaper article about some local elected official who took their credit card, their office credit card, and went shopping at Walmart and bought a purse, and all the way up to hundreds of thousands of dollars being stolen. So Attorney General Zeller thought, we can do better than this. Here in Indiana, we've got a pretty good reputation for being have integrity and ethics. I mean, we're certainly not Louisiana, and we're certainly not Illinois. But I will tell you that not so long ago, in fact, it was about 3 years ago, there was a thing called a State Integrity Project investigation, and it was a group that came in and they looked at all of the states and scored states based on how much integrity their state and local government had. And Indiana placed at a C-, 23 out of 50 in corruption risk. Now, they assessed 16 categories. So Indiana scored best and got A's in things like state pension fund management, internal auditing, and state budgeting practices. It scored worse in public access to information and ethics enforcement. I thought that kind of gives you some idea. I think Indiana can do better than a C-. I think we can be an A. And I'm preaching to the choir here today, because those of you who come to these conferences and do all of the studying that you're supposed to be doing are well aware of what needs to be done in your offices. But we can all use some help and some reminders from time to time. So the Public Integrity Coalition was formed a little over a year ago. It consists of the Attorney General's office, the State Examiner and the State Board of Accounts, both federal prosecutors, Northern and Southern District, AIC, IACT, and then all of the associations that are covered by the umbrellas of IACT and AIC. So every single organization has a representative. We've been meeting periodically over the last year, and we divided into 4 committees initially: training, legislative, statewide model ethics code, culture, and outreach. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each one of those, and I'm going to finish up with our legislative proposal that the coalition has recommended and will be presented in the state legislature. So I think you'll be interested in that. The training committee met several times and deliberated because there was some question as should the state require training? Well, I will say that my personal opinion is that it probably does, because all of you come to your training. It's the folks who aren't coming to training that are the problems. However, we did find that most of the associations are actually doing some sort of training already and requiring their membership to do so. So instead of doing a requirement yet, the committee came up with the concept of simply making some training recommendations. And that includes that everyone should have 2 hours of integrity training every year. Most of you are going to get that in your regular conference. But we call it integrity training and not just ethics, because one of the things that we want to include in the training is best management practices. Of course, State Board of Accounts tells you all of the ins and outs about where this needs to be posted and that needs to be handled. But this committee believes that we need to do a little bit more of a reminder to folks about what it is to be an ethical office holder, what it is to have employees that understand integrity. We had a summit for the Attorney General's office back at the it was in the spring, I think, and several of you have heard this story, but I use it quite frequently because I think it's a very important story. The Morgan County prosecutor came to speak at our conference because he had actually indicted and convicted a county elected official for misconduct. And he came to the conference down at the government center, you know, the big auditorium, and there's a sign there that says no food or drinks in the auditorium. And he had just bought this giant cup of coffee. And he's sipping it, and he looks at the sign, and so what did he do? He opened the door, looked in to see what everybody else was doing in the auditorium, and no one else had drinks. So he went out and drank as much coffee as he could and then threw it away. The point was the sign saying not to do it was not what caused him not to do it. It was what everybody else was doing. So reminding all of you, all of us, and your employees about the importance of ethical behavior regularly is important. So in the 2 hours of training, the committee, the coalition recommends at least these four topics. Overview of Indiana public corruption statutes. And by the way, there was a handout, hopefully you got it. It does cover the code sites for public corruption statutes. Just a reminder, and it's been shocking to me as I've been out speaking around the state, how many people didn't know these were felonies in and of themselves, and that you can be convicted of a felony and you will lose your office. So lots of people are like, well, I thought misconduct was something less than that. No, it's a felony. So please take that home and refresh your memory. The second topic, best practices for transparency. Again, the best way for people to avoid having issues in their office is to be as transparent as possible. Now, as a former elected official, I also lived with folks who requested information ad nauseum and would drive you crazy trying to get more and more documents. So I understand that sometimes you've got to figure out what access to information is appropriate. But to the extent possible, as much as you can record your meetings, it just keeps everything above the fray. Third topic, values of public service, why culture matters. And that goes back to that idea that, looking in the auditorium and seeing what everybody else was doing is so important. Multiple times we've heard stories about being in a community where, I'll tell you this story. My husband was on the Marion County Liquor Board for a number of years, and just a couple of years before he took that position, it was common practice for those people coming before the Liquor Board to submit their application to the first member at the desk with its little stack of $100 bills paper clipped, and the first commissioner would take the $100 bill off the bottom and pass the packet to the next commissioner, and he would take his until it was all done, and then they would proceed handling the application. And that was just the way it was done for years. No one in the audience seemed to think that was a bad idea, and people applying, and none of the commissioners did. Fortunately, those types of things have changed dramatically. I think we're all a lot better. But again, that concept of what is appropriate, it's not necessarily what the next person next to you is doing. Just because they're doing it doesn't necessarily mean it's right. And then the final one is a topic of building an ethical organization, because you can be the most ethical office holder all day long. If you've got an employee who's doing something wrong and thinks that they can get away with it, then it's your responsibility to handle those things. So all of this training we intend to do in conjunction with State Board of Accounts. I will be still out doing lots of training sessions for folks. I think it will be relatively easy for folks to get their 2 hours of training in every year. We are working with IACT and AIC to self-report those to the Public Integrity Coalition. We intend to give awards to those office holders who complete those and their staff, because we are recommending it for your staff as well, not just you. And so we hope that that encourages folks when we send out a news release and say the Marion County Auditor did all of this training, completed best practices training. Hopefully the newspaper reporters turn to the next person and say, well, did you get that done? Because then we start that process of it being normalized. So that's the training component. Statewide model ethics code. Lots of cities in particular have already adopted model ethics codes. This is not a requirement, but we have produced a document. It'll be on our website, the Public Integrity Coalition website, which is through the Attorney General's office website, and it will allow organizations, either county councils or individual office holders, to adopt these ethics codes. It's a pretty typical ethics code. There is one thing that's in it that we think is very important, and that is the idea that you have a responsibility to report if you see something wrong. You ethically have to report it. We've had a number of occasions where someone knew something was happening, they weren't involved in doing it themselves, but oh, she was hard times and she needed the money and I didn't want to turn her in. You have an ethical responsibility if you see poor behavior to report it. So that is in the Model Ethics Code. The other thing to know about the Model Ethics Code is that it's only as good as the training and making sure that the employees in your community have actually read it. All of the stuff that's out there and webinars, I mean, there's training available like crazy, and human resources officers are constantly, and new employees, having them sign stuff. The important thing is to make sure people are really reading it. If they just sign it, then, oh yeah, I got my ethics training. It's like the HIPAA form at the doctor's office. How many of you ever read the HIPAA form before you sign it? I don't, and I'm a lawyer, so there you go. So we're going to make that available for everyone in any community that wants to do it. Culture and Outreach is a separate committee that encourages being out in the community. So training is about all of you and your employees, but Culture and Outreach is about being out in the community and letting the public know that people are working hard to gain their trust in government. So Rotary clubs, speaking, and that sort of thing. I quoted one of my favorite presidents, Teddy Roosevelt. I don't know if you all had watched that PBS series lately, but I've read a lot of books about him. And in the 1890s, he was the head of the Civil Service Commission. And he understood that the public opinion was the single most effective tool, or prod, to change the behavior of public officials. He had to install a sense of his own outrage, he said, from the bottom to the top, and from the top to the bottom. So when the public gets enraged because their tax dollars were misspent, that puts pressure on public servants not to do it. So that's part of the culture and outreach, being out and talking about these things. I don't want to run over my time here. So let me get to the final committee is the Legislative Committee. And what the coalition intended to do was quite frankly, take baby steps. You will not find anything in here that's really crazy. The entire coalition voted to support this legislative package. And so I'll just run through them. There's one that I specifically wanted to talk about because it may affect your offices a little bit more. First of all, we are going to be writing a whistleblower confidentiality protection statute for local officials. There's already one at the federal level and the state level. We've mirrored the language for whistleblowers for state to protect those employees who do report from being harassed or losing their job and so forth. So that's a pretty logical one that just never got put into place for local governments. Let's see. We also want to do a statewide bond database. That database, as you all know, as you report the bonds that you as elected officials are required to have, and then State Board of Accounts comes in and does your 2-year audit, and then someone in your county who was supposed to have a bond, didn't have the bond. A lot of times they just weren't even aware that they needed to take care of it, or they thought someone else was doing it. And it just has never really been centralized in terms of a way to identify in advance before the audit that someone needs to have a bond put in place. So State Board of Accounts is already, and you can ask those folks today, I think they're speaking to you today. We're planning on just doing it as part of the regular cycle of reports that are turned into them, so I don't think it'll be that much more work, but we will be able to review it, and if there is a county treasurer or a county clerk who has not gotten their bond, we can send them a letter saying, you got to get your bond, and oh, by the way, if you don't do it within the next month, there are more ramifications. So that protects the taxpayers, again, if something has gone wrong. Another issue, which is really doesn't affect all of you so much, but we're also allowing interlocal agreements for city and town treasurers in some very small towns that are constitutionally required to have the city treasurer's, the town treasurer's job on the ballot. They can't find anyone out of a community of 600 people who are qualified to be the town treasurer, and they've been stuck. This will allow the town council, if there is legitimately not a candidate for that position, to create an interlocal agreement with another town, with another city, to have that town treasurer be acting for both until the end of that term. So it would then go back on the ballot again. We don't want to circumvent anyone's ability to run for the office if they want to. If the interlocal agreement can't be negotiated, then the town council can go hire a professional CPA to conduct that business. So then the final thing about legislative that I think has been the piece that we think is one of the most important has to do with who gets bonded. In many offices, county treasurers will do a blanket bond for everybody in their office, but county clerks, for instance, don't. We are proposing legislative language that says anyone who handles public funds must be bonded. So this does two things, because when we look at our list of cases in which we have to go after people, and the first thing we do is go after the bond money, of course. And by the way, all of that money comes back to that local unit of government. It does not stay with the state. We have found that in the large proportion of the cases, the person who did the misdeed and who is being prosecuted was never covered by the bond, so there's nothing there to collect on. And as you probably all can guess, most of the people who've stolen money, the money's long gone. We can't go after their own private money, so the local subdivision is simply out of the money. So by requiring all people who handle public funds to have bonds, we think we'll get a lot of that covered. We are in the process of running some reports, and we'll be putting that on our website to show you, because some people have questioned, is it going to be that much more expensive for my office? You know, budgets are tight, et cetera. But I think we can pretty easily prove that having those bonds in place will have so much money coming back into those local subdivisions when we catch people doing wrong things. The other thing that we hope that this encourages for people is to limit the number of people in your office handling public funds. I use the example, when I was county clerk, we had a basement full of documents and two young men working down there for copies. And we had a camera on them for security reasons, not thinking that we were watching them necessarily. And people would come up and pay cash in their copies, and a couple of dollars would go in the pockets. Well, you know, that added up over time. So what we ended up doing is changing our procedure so that only our finance office would handle money, and you'd get your receipt, and you would go down and get your copies from your receipt. So we believe that it's a much better practice, a much better business management practice to limit the number of people who are actually handling the funds. The question did arise, well, what happens if my chief deputy can't get a bond because he has a bankruptcy and he just got divorced, and et cetera, et cetera? And really the answer is the people who can't get bonds probably shouldn't be handling public funds. And I hate to be, I mean, some circumstances of people not being able to get bonds are truly bad situations, illness in the family, but we find that those are the first people who actually are most tempted to do something wrong. So either find another position in the office where they're not actually handling public funds, or you know, you'll have to make that call. Now, I will say that you can pretty much get a bond for anybody if you want to pay enough. So we have had a couple of elected officials who had to pay an exorbitant amount for their first year. They rolled off of a bankruptcy after the 7th year, and then they were able to get a regular bond rate. But those are some of the things that we feel very strongly will help the state recoup the funds. But again, our real goal here is to prevent it from happening to begin with. So we hope that with all of these various projects and training and your help, that we will be successful. With that, I want to just open up for some questions and comments, please, if you've got some ideas. And by the way, if you'd like to email me, if you've got an idea where you would perhaps like someone to, or me or someone else from the Attorney General's office come and speak to any of your group, we will be doing training sessions, the more the merrier for us. My name is Doris Ann, DORISANNE Sadler, SADLER, at atg.in.gov. And you do have to put the whole Doris Ann thing in. Like I said, I'm from Louisiana, and my parents gave me a double name, so I'm stuck with it. Do I have any questions from anyone? You're all quiet. It's because your offices are absolutely perfect, I know. All right, well, thank you for, oh, there's one back there.
So are you suggesting that maybe treasurer have their separate bond and auditor have separate cards with everybody coming to work in our office?
Oh, great. Yeah, so you've got, what is it a blanket bond for everyone that works in the office? If you've got a blanket bond already for everyone in your office, you're good to go. So it doesn't need to do that if it's a blanket bond for the office. So if you've already got a blanket bond, you're good to go. This is for those folks who don't have blanket bonds and only bond themselves as the elected official, even though they've got folks handling money in the office. But like I said, a lot of the treasurers and auditors probably already have blanket bonds just because of the nature of the business that they do, but some local officials don't. That was easy. Well, thank you all again. Do email me if you have a group that you would like to have anyone come speak to, or if you have any suggestions or ideas. As the Public Integrity Coalition continues to ramp up, I think you'll see additional legislative ideas coming forward, and we hope at the end of about 2 years we'll be able to really point to the numbers that we've ultimately reduced the number of cases that the Attorney General has to go after the money. That will be when we know we've had a success, and maybe an A on the report card. Anyway, thank you all. Good to see you.